Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's meeting of the Board of Revenue Estimates. I'm Comptroller Peter Francho. We're joined by Treasurer Davis and Secretary Brinkley. I would like to recognize the board's Executive Secretary and Acting Director of the Bureau of Revenue Estimates, Mr. David Farkas, for his report. David, go ahead.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Comptroller. Let me get that up on my screen. Okay. So again, I'm David Farkas, the Acting Director of the Bureau of Revenue Estimates, here in my capacity as the Executive Secretary of the Board of Revenue Estimates, to present the proposed revision to the General Fund revenue forecast for fiscal 23 and 22. This first slide here shows all the numbers and details of the tax types that we are revising. You know, the amount we're revising them upwards, you know, what that means for the bottom line. For fiscal 22, it's an upward revision of $867 million. For fiscal 23, it's an upward revision of $737 million. This next slide focuses specifically on the changes we're making. Just over half the revision in each fiscal year is attributable to the personal income tax, but we're generally seeing revenue collections above our prior expectations across the board. I'll note that this forecast would assume revenue growth of 7.8% in fiscal year 22, and for that growth to slow to 4.8% in fiscal 23. Year to date, this shows where the general fund tax revenue sources are compared to where we expected them to be at the end of January. The important point here is the bottom line in the bottom right. At the end of January, we were already $677 million above where we expected to be at the end of January when we produced our last forecast. So the upward revision we're proposing here is driven primarily by year-to-date revenue collections that are already in the door. And these revenue collections show that underlying income and consumption activity was higher, likely higher than we initially expected. And that fuels the revision in fiscal 23. And we expect that growth in underlying income to continue, and therefore revenue growth to continue off of this higher base. And that is why the majority of the revision flows through to fiscal 23. This next table, again, shows the revenue growth we've experienced year to date compared to our forecasts. So we are forecasting growth in fiscal 22 for the personal income tax of 7.1%. Year to date, we are up 11.3% over the prior year. To hit the forecast that we're proposing this March, we would need revenue growth in the personal income tax to slow substantially to 1.9% for the remainder of the year. To hit the forecast we made in December, we would need growth to go substantially negative to negative 7.2% growth. And the main point here is that this forecast that we're proposing, while it is a large upward revision in terms of total dollars, takes a very cautious approach, assuming that revenue collection, the growth in revenue collection that we've seen so far this year, slows substantially before the year ends. Now, we've seen elevated revenue growth since the pandemic due to federal and state level pandemic stimulus efforts. And we are still experiencing the indirect impacts of those efforts rippling through the economy. They have boosted income growth throughout the pandemic, as well as boosting consumption. And now we do expect that growth to slow towards a more normal level, more normal rate of growth. But exactly when that slowdown will occur and how much growth will slow is a source of uncertainty in these forecasts. But again, we do assume in this forecast that revenue growth slows considerably over the remainder of the fiscal year. Driving the revenue growth we've experienced is nominal wage growth. And nominal means it's not adjusted for inflation. We collect taxes in nominal dollars, so that is what we forecast off of. You can see that nominal wage growth has been elevated ever since it began its recovery from the depths of the early recession in the pandemic. And that's backed up by our own withholding income tax data. Before the pandemic, a normal rate of growth for income tax withholding was about 4% a year. And we've seen growth of around 6 to 8% a year since the pandemic began. I'll note that income tax withholding is around 80% of the total income tax. So this really drives state revenues in a significant way. We've seen this elevated wage growth, surpassing pre-pandemic peaks, even though total employment in Maryland remains just under 100,000 jobs below its pre-pandemic peak. So we're getting a lot more wage income from fewer jobs than we had pre-pandemic, which speaks to significant growth in the average wage. Partly this reflects the uneven nature of the recovery. It's, the aggregate income that matters for tax revenue forecasting, but that's not representative of the experiences of everyone in this pandemic. It's been a very unequal recovery. Job losses were concentrated in lower wage industries, whereas higher wage industries have already recovered their pre-pandemic employment levels to the benefit of our tax revenue collections. We elected to keep our forecast of taxable capital gains the same as we had back in December. And the forecast for tax year 22 is for 0% growth in capital gains. Now, geopolitical concerns, particularly the war in Ukraine, present a source of risk to some extent in our forecasts. There's currently a stock market sell-off going on. And when asset prices decline, that lowers potential capital gains. But prices are declining because people are selling their assets, which creates taxable capital gains income when they make the sale, as long as they didn't take a loss over the full lifetime of that investment. So sell-off, the point is that sell-offs can often trigger elevated capital gains income, which is what is taxed. So there is some upside risk. There's risks on both sides with a 0% growth forecast for capital gains. Other sources of non-wage income, which includes things like proprietor's income, dividends, interest, rental income. We have raised those mildly in tax year 22 and 23. And that also helps explain why the upward revision we're making in fiscal 22 carries over into fiscal 23. The bottom line here is that income growth appears to have exceeded our prior expectations, and therefore revenue has as well. And we expect that growth to continue. Shifting more towards consumption, this chart shows disposable personal income throughout, even before the pandemic, as well as the national savings rate. And the key takeaway here is that total disposable personal income kept growing throughout the pandemic, and that growth in income allowed individuals to increase their savings. Excuse me. So the savings rate in the fourth quarter of calendar 21 has returned to a more normal savings rate given the pre-pandemic history. But what this means is the level of savings has greatly increased. So the fact is that individuals in the aggregate have increased their savings, and we think that gives us confidence about the ability of consumption to be sustained in the near term, even without any additional stimulus measures. Year to date, the sales tax is up 27.5%, when we were expecting it to be up 22.7%. You can see the most recent month that we have full data for is January, which is based on sales made in December and revenue that was collected in January. That was up more than 45% versus the prior January. So we've seen considerable growth. One hedge that the Revenue Monitoring Committee made with this estimate was to reduce our upward revision to the sales tax, and that was motivated by the fact that the war in Ukraine has led to higher gas prices, and higher gas prices mean consumers have less to spend on all other goods, including taxable goods. So we did pare back our forecast, our upward revision to the sales tax based on the principle that, if people are spending more on gas, they have less to spend on everything else. As always, there are several risks to the forecast, which could influence things either way. COVID is an ever-present risk to our forecasts. It's an unprecedented event, which means it's very difficult to model and predict. And we never know when a new variant is going to change the trajectory. I've mentioned the war in Ukraine. The most immediate impact we've experienced here is higher gas prices, which makes the sales tax the tax type that we would see any potential impact in the near term on, whereas the income taxes, at least for the rest of fiscal 22, it's largely being driven by income earned in tax year 21. Excuse me. Another risk to the forecast is loose monetary policy. Inflation has been elevated for a while now, and is currently well above the Fed's target. In the short term, persistent inflation would lead to an inflationary boom, which would boost our nominal revenue growth. But that carries with it the risk of a recession in the medium term, as the central bank has to play catch up. And so there's the risk that they, hit the brakes too hard trying to catch up. Capital gains and non-wage income are another ever-present risk to our forecasts. More and more of our general fund revenue over time is derived from non-wage income. It's currently at very high levels. Capital gains and non-wage income usually doesn't stay at these high levels, certainly not indefinitely, but it is very difficult to predict when this income would decline and to what extent it would decline. Moving on, this chart shows 4 different forecasters' inflation expectations for the next 5 years. I'll note that the Fed's target is 2%. So essentially, over the next 5 years from March, most forecasters expect the Fed to miss its target to the high side. And I'll note that for the Fed to hit its current target, they would need below average inflation to cancel out the above average inflation. So this is essentially a prediction that monetary policy will miss its target and allow higher inflation than they intended. In conclusion, our revenue adjustment that we're proposing today is based primarily on year-to-date revenue collections that are already in the door, as well as an upward adjustment in our expectations of both wage and non-wage income growth going forward, which is why the upward revision carries out into fiscal 23. Non-wage income is currently at very high levels. As I said, it's very difficult to forecast when you get to an inflection point. And while downturns in non-wage income are typically rapid, so usually is the recovery in non-wage income. And ongoing inflation will provide a boost in the near term to nominal revenue collections, but it will also raise nominal expenditures. And that concludes my prepared remarks and my presentation. Thank you all for your attention to this matter, and I'd like to thank the Revenue Monitoring Committee for its important role in reaching a consensus on these estimates before they are presented to the board.
Thank you very much, David. As always, on behalf of my colleagues who are going to speak shortly, Treasurer Davis and Secretary Brinkley, I just want to thank you for your outstanding work. You prepared an exceptional report, and appreciate you presenting the highlights of that. I also want to thank your entire BRE staff, along with the Revenue Monitoring Committee, for their thorough and tireless work in drawing up these estimates. It's never easy. Pandemic has made it even more complicated. But your professionalism and expertise allow us to make responsible, tough decisions that strengthen our economy, ensure our long-term growth, and safeguard the people of the state of Maryland. I thank you for the incredible work that you do to prepare these reports. It's not easy, especially when incorporating unforeseen factors such as the effects of the world events you mentioned, the COVID-19 health pandemic, and much more. As Mr. Farkas noted in his report, this board is being asked to approve recommendations that would increase our December 2021 revenue projections for fiscal year 2022 to $22.5 billion, representing an $867 million increase. Additionally, we're revising our December estimate for fiscal year 2023 to $23.5 billion, representing a $737 million increase. Cumulatively, we're increasing our revenue projections from December by $1.6 billion for the current and upcoming fiscal years. These numbers include the long-term effects of federal stimulus money in Maryland's economy, which has created growth in both our individual and corporate tax revenue. These are tremendous numbers, and they demonstrate how aid from the federal level continues to have long-lasting positive ripple effects and continues to help the state's overall economy. The fact that Maryland shows growth despite many unforeseen factors in the past 2 years is a testament to the sound long-term decisions made by this board and other state officials that have built this state's economy to withstand many unforeseen circumstances. However, among the good news, and this is good news that we're reporting today, we can't take Maryland's overall good financial health for granted and assume things are back to normal. As Mr. Farkas noted in his report, today's numbers have been adjusted to include several factors that have occurred in the last few months. Federal stimulus funding the past 2 years provided this state with cash infusion to help many Marylanders and has been shown to have long-term positive effects on our economy. Decreasing COVID-19 case numbers, thanks to Governor Hogan and the legislature and all the local officials, in conjunction with the wider availability of vaccines and testing, gives us hope that we're coming close to the end of the pandemic and resuming our normal lives. Maryland's continued wage growth is also positive as businesses are increasing their pay in order to recruit and hire more people back into the workforce. In addition, the promise of more federal funding to improve Maryland's infrastructure means more jobs, especially in our skilled labor sector. But even though today's report is good news for the state's bottom line, underscores the strong bones of our state's economy and our ability to weather tough times, many Maryland families continue to face some of the toughest financial times due to the economic instability created by the pandemic. There's still a large group of Marylanders who are not feeling or getting their fair share of the economic prosperity that the vast majority of those in the upper two-thirds, all of us here and others, are experiencing. The economic fault lines that existed before COVID-19 forced our economy to shut down. I just emphasize that. For so many of our friends and neighbors who are in low-wage jobs, they continue to suffer from the devastation of this pandemic without much hope of things immediately turning around. That's why today I'm respectfully renewing my call for the General Assembly to pass a second round of economic stimulus to benefit low-wage earners, small businesses, and child care providers who continue to struggle. I'm talking about $2,000 emergency survival checks for our low-wage earners and EITC recipients, especially as global supply chain issues and inflation have significantly impacted their cost of living expenses and basic necessities like food, rent, and transportation. I'm talking about an additional $500 million in aid for our small businesses, particularly our minority-owned businesses and women-owned businesses that were the hardest hit by the economic consequences of this pandemic. And I'm talking about $500 million to help our child care providers at a time when hundreds of these for-profit small businesses were forced to shutter their doors for good, at a time when the cost right now to affordable, reliable child care continues to be out of reach for thousands of Maryland families across our state. I personally am proud that President Biden, with significant bipartisan support in Congress, recently announced a ban on Russian oil imports so that we can stop sending millions of dollars to the Kremlin that fund their unjust, unprovoked, illegal, and immoral war on Ukraine. This conflict that Vladimir Putin has initiated has caused gas prices to skyrocket at a time when many Maryland families are already struggling to balance their household budgets to afford their groceries, pay for their rent, health care, and other basic necessities. And our residents shouldn't shoulder the brunt of Putin's criminal actions and the efforts of the free world to stop the bloodshed and destruction that Putin is causing in Ukraine. Before Russia's invasion of Ukraine, the average per gallon price of gasoline for regular gas in Maryland was $3.23 a gallon. Yesterday, it was $4.03 a gallon, and it's only going to keep going up. Luckily for the state of Maryland, we're in this unprecedented financial position with $7.5 billion. We have enough money to help our residents and small businesses weather these challenging and uncertain economic times. That's why, in addition to calling for the $1 billion for survival, second round of survival checks, as the state's chief fiscal officer and motor fuel regulator, I'm calling on the governor and General Assembly respectfully to work together and enact a 3-month gas tax holiday. And I echo the calls for a moratorium on the federal gas tax that have come from a bipartisan group of governors, state lawmakers, and members of Congress around the country. To be sure, such a holiday would result in a fiscal impact to the state. But with today's increased revenue projections, we're now talking, obviously, about $7.5 billion in excess revenue in a largely 2-year span. We're in a strong financial position to help Marylanders and our small businesses. And if passed, this gas tax holiday provides immediate financial relief for all Marylanders, not just the 500,000 low-wage earning families that I have tax information about and to whom we need to send these survival checks. This would affect everybody. The Maryland gas tax, which is 37 cents per gallon, I believe, and combined with the federal gas tax, if the Congress is able to give a 3-month waiver on that, it's talking about almost 60 cents per gallon that could be saved almost immediately. It's by far, frankly, the most regressive tax we have in Maryland that we collect from our citizens. Together with stimulus checks for our lowest wage earners, the state can take immediate action to do immediate good with this budget surplus. This money, frankly, is not politicians' money. This is the people's money. And those of us entrusted in public office should invest this surplus to offer some much needed relief for fellow Marylanders whose budgets aren't experiencing revenue surpluses of historic proportions. That said, I'd really like to turn it over to my two colleagues who are unbelievably talented and important people in this bipartisan effort to steer the state's economy. Let me introduce Secretary Brinkley for any comments from him.
Thank you, Mr. Comptroller. I presume the sound is working now?
Yes.
Okay, excellent. And Mr. Comptroller, I do appreciate those comments. And good afternoon, everybody. Again, I appreciate the Comptroller Francho being here and certainly Treasurer Davis being on board. This is an exciting time as we try to deal with this change. And I want to commend Mr. Farkas and his team for the work that they do. I don't think the public can really appreciate as these numbers are coming in and as they are talking and digesting it and saying, is this really true? My deputy, Mark Nicole, used to have hair, and he kept scratching his head and losing all his hair in that regard. So it's, Mr. Treasurer, I see you've gotten there too. So, we're all along that line. But these new numbers are certainly positive news. And I've been here, as the Comptroller has too, when we've had to go the other way on some of these recommendations and decisions. And let me tell you, that's no fun. It's no fun at all. Marylanders are a hardy stock, I think, even as the Comptroller alluded to, coming through the pandemic as we have. And we see the citizens also approving of the governor's words and actions as he led us through this very challenging time. But we're not out of the woods with coronavirus, and we have to remain vigilant all across the spectrum. Yes, federal assistance has helped us get back on our feet and to move forward with a hearty recovery, and these numbers do reflect that. But also released today was the Department of Labor's annual inflation figure, a gargantuan 7.9% since last February. And that does not include almost the daily increases in fuel prices that the Comptroller referenced. No doubt, the Russian invasion of Ukraine will continue to loom large over the world economy for the next year. And I do not, and especially since I have 3 Ukrainian-born nieces, ignore the humanitarian disaster that befalls over there. But Americans and Marylanders certainly will not escape some of those economic effects and impacts. So while our focus might be on international events on the news, we here collectively are charged with taking care of financial issues here in Maryland. It's no secret that due to the governor's prudent fiscal decisions, cooperation with legislative leaders and his colleagues on the Board of Public Works, the Comptroller and the Treasurer here, that I share this forum with, that the governor's stewardship throughout the pandemic and the budgetary process, that our state's financial position reflected in these new revenues is very positive. However, what would a Board of Revenue Estimates meeting be without me offering some type of advice or cautionary statement? I see the Comptroller nodding his head. So while today's revenue numbers are encouraging, the legislature needs to avoid getting sidetracked into passing expensive legislation. In my conversation with legislative budget team leaders, they understand this. Let's hope that the members of the other policy committees understand this too, particularly in an election year. Some members of the legislature, and especially the high-paid lobbying corps, have their eyes on this money to spend freely. My admonition is, remember, and the Comptroller referenced this, I always call it OPM. It's other people's money. It's not our money. It's not the government's money. It's the taxpayers' money. So I got a couple things that I want to hopefully direct to them. And my underlying premise, before I get to those two key points, is that we are going to fund important shared priorities, especially education, childcare, as the comptroller referenced, and healthcare. We will ensure that the state's infrastructure helps and does not hinder our growing economy and things for the long term. But please, legislature, do at least two more things. Leave a very generous rainy day fund, well above, perhaps even 12 to 13%, well above the 9% that they targeted in the committee that they had beforehand, the Spending Affordability Committee. This is the shock absorber. This 12 to 13% can be the shock absorber for the state's fiscal protection for the future governor and legislators as they try to deal with any type of changes that occur in the future. And not if they occur in the future, when they occur in the future, particularly if they happen to be negative. And use this opportunity to provide some relief to some key Marylanders. The governor's retirement tax relief proposal needs to be passed by the legislature so that working class people who have worked and paid taxes their careers in this state can also then afford to retire in Maryland, to stay in their homes, which may very well be paid off, stay near their children and their grandchildren, and stay in the communities that they raise their families in so they can give back in whatever form or fashion they can give back to those communities once they're retired. They might volunteer to help other seniors. They might teach or tutor our young, reading, math, or vocational skills, whatever they can bring to the table. They might coach or mentor younger professionals or entrepreneurs. And as a sidebar, we have to point out that we are very blessed here in Maryland, being a part of the Maryland, DC, Virginia corridor and community, that we have so many retired military and intelligence professionals. By intelligence, I'm referencing NSA and all of those professionals that we have nearby here and those businesses that evolve around there. They also just happen to have excellent health care when they retire. Let's not forget that. But many of these retirees have spent a lifetime developing their science, technology, engineering, and mathematical skills. Yes, the very STEM skills that we're so aggressively pursuing and developing in our schools. The governor's retirement proposal is an opportunity for the state to do something to help those already here stay here and reinvest those skills back into our youth and our communities. Let's help them to retire here. What a great opportunity the legislature has to pass this budget with these new revenues appropriately shared to one-time infrastructure improvements and significant tax relief to these retirees, and also leaving a significant financial cushion for the future governor and legislators. This sets the table, so to speak, for Marylanders for years to come. Governor Hogan's fiscal tune has remained consistent throughout his term. Maryland's best path forward is to continue to show restraint, save for what we know will be a rainy day, and spend or at least invest those funds responsibly. And let's share some of the state's largesse with an extremely valuable demographic, our retirees. So thank you, Mr. Comptroller, and I'm happy to turn it over to the Treasurer at this point.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Secretary Brinkley and Treasurer Davis. We're delighted to hear from you.
Thank you, gentlemen, very much. It's certainly, let me start by saying good afternoon. And I want to thank the Bureau of Revenue Estimate staff and the other members of the Revenue Monitoring Committee for their help in developing this estimate. The revenue revision is sizable and reflects the strength of the Maryland economy. Clearly, the federal stimulus and the actions that the state has taken during the pandemic have brought us to this moment. The General Assembly in particular has done and continues to do the important work of helping our citizens and businesses navigate this volatile economic climate. While much remains unknown about the world around us, we can take some measure of comfort in the positive projections before us today. You know, I was thinking about something Abraham Lincoln once said, and I'm going to paraphrase it. He said, the role of government is to do for the people what the people cannot do for themselves. With this revenue write-up, I believe there is an opportunity for the state to make prudent investments to help Marylanders who need it most. I have full confidence in Speaker Jones, President Ferguson, and the members of the General Assembly, along with the governor, to do just that, to take this opportunity to make those who've had a rougher time, who've struggled just a bit more trying to recover from this, this terrible pandemic and the resulting economic impacts, as well as the international incidents that are unfolding now. Take this opportunity to help them, to help everyone get back on their feet and to continue moving forward. And that way, I trust that this estimate will help inform the next steps that are needed to position our state for success in the years to come. So, gentlemen, thank you again to Mr. Farkas, the other members, once again, of the Revenue Monitoring Committee. And I'm excited about this opportunity that we have before us and what we can do to help our fellow Marylanders.
Thank you, Mr. Treasurer. And Mr. Secretary, if I could ask you to make a motion to adopt the March General Fund estimates of $22.459 billion for fiscal year 2022 and $23.526 billion for fiscal year 2023.
So, Mr. Comptroller, since we've all been in the legislature, I know we were also with the previous treasurer too, I'll just say, I so move that motion.
And I will second it.
Excellent. All of us, I believe, are in favor. Nobody's opposed. So thank you very much. And Mr. Farkas, please make sure everything is properly signed, sealed, and delivered. And my best wishes to everyone in the state of Maryland, because it's a wonderful, wonderful state that we have. And I think all of us working together collectively will make it even better.
Yes, indeed.
Thanks, everyone. Meeting's over. And let me just hang on a minute here now. Are there questions that, Alan, you have gotten from the press, or maybe the press can just contact us separately? How's that?
Yeah, there are no questions.
Great. Thank you all very much.